What is going on, guys? Jeff here. Saltwater Aquarium Radio, Mad Hatters of the Reef, Corals of the Unlimited, the man of many hats. Today we got a brand new video for you, and this is a little bit different than our conventional videos. Sometimes we do these long format videos. I don't know how long this video is going to be, but it's definitely going to be a very uncut video. So for those of you that like the heavily edited Jeff, this is not the place. But a couple things before we jump into the top 4 questions that I find new folks that are getting started with reef tanks and talking of the subject when it comes to mixing saltwater. I wanted to talk really quickly about Corals Unlimited auctions. So started a whole new thing. For those of you that do or do not know, I own a brick and mortar fish store. And that brick and mortar fish store name is Corals Unlimited. Well, we recently started doing auctions, and it's been pretty fun, and been enjoying the process of that. Still has some quirks, we're working through them, but we've been kind of beta testing it, and I think it's getting to a place now where we could kind of start talking about it with you folks. So if you're looking to get some awesome deals on corals, jump over to coralsunlimitedauctions.com and check out what we got going on over there. We typically upload for Thursdays, and then the auctions start closing out on Sunday night. And this week's a little bit different. That's why I kind of stalled out there for a minute there. So we're going to be going down to the New England Frag Farmers Market. We're closing the store Friday and Saturday, and wanted to do something for the folks, the local folks up here, and for folks that kind of tag along. We got 2 days of auctions happening this weekend, so a little something different this weekend, but generally the auctions are going to upload Wednesday, Thursday night, and then they'll run through until Sunday night, and then close out. And then if we need to do the shippings, we'll do the shippings. If it's local pickup, the whole deal, whatever. Today, talking about the top 4 questions that I find new hobbyists asking when it comes to mixing saltwater for their reef tank. And without further ado, let's jump into question 1, and that is, how do you mix saltwater for your aquariums? Now, when I first put this question up here, I kind of wanted to go like just the real quick, hit them in the teeth answer, and that is, depending on the brand of salt that you are using for your mixing of saltwater, you really need to follow the directions that that manufacturer is providing. That cannot be stressed enough, and it's a little dangerous if you are scouring the interwebs and finding a video, may or may not be on this channel, and using what you're finding there for information and applying it to your salt, because you might not be using the same salt that I am using, and that is a recipe for disaster. When I put that video up, I don't know, 10 or so years ago, I never really thought of the responsibility associated with that, and I wanted to kind of stress that here. And I've also have made other videos kind of poking fun at that video, and there's some points in there that are important, but there's definitely the nuts and bolts of mixing salt water. You really need to follow the directions that are provided with your brand of salt. With that being said, some things that I would like to talk about when it comes to mixing salt water is water quality. I quite often have heard recently, with new folks getting into the hobby, of using tap water, and it's a fickle subject. I actually have heard, and I'm not going to even get into where, but I was at a fish store, and it wasn't a local fish store. I'll just leave it at that. And I was buying some fish, and a customer saw me there, and I kind of started giving him a hard time. I'm like, "Hey man, what are you doing? You cheating on me?" And the person that was helping me was kind of oblivious to what was going on between me and this individual. And he kind of like hung his head and walked over to me, and he's like, I was coming in here and check some things out. And I'm like, "No, don't worry about it, guy. I'm in here buying something, so don't worry about it." This was a while ago, and I guess to put a little bit more context into that, I didn't have a account set up with Biota yet for my store, and they had yellow tanks. So I went in there and I bought all the yellow tanks. I quarantined them, cured them of what was ailing them, and then was selling them to my customers and told my customers what I was doing, and they were okay with it because they knew that they were getting a healthy fish. Anyways, the guy goes, "Hey, you got water going?" I'm like, "Yeah, I got water. Should be all set." And he's like, "I'll stop in a little bit and I'll get some water off you." And then the employee of the store started talking about RODI, and they were like, "Yeah, don't worry about RODI. You know, you're gonna take all that stuff out of the water and just put it back in. Doesn't really make a whole lot of sense." And I just like, ooh, okay. And then that guy looks at me and he goes, "Yeah," he goes, "I got uranium in my water, and that wouldn't be a good idea for anything, you know, let alone uranium being present in his water, taking showers, cooking, whatever." Obviously, that's probably a little bit more higher on the list than it is, you know, worrying about the fish tank. But nonetheless, it is a slippery slope when you start playing the tap water game with reef tanks, because you're trying to start with a pure product. And if you are just taking tap water, throwing conditioner in there, that is a recipe for disaster on a long enough timeline. Tanks can ultimately crash if you have too much TDS in the system. Basically, you're just going to have a crash happen, and you're like, "I don't know what's going wrong. Everything's perfect." No. So I can't stress enough using a RODI filter, starting with high quality pure water for mixing salt water. The other thing that I would talk about also generically when you are talking about mixing salt water is slowly mixing the water slowly mixing the salt into the water. You really want to avoid just dumping it in, and that's something that I struggle with myself because, you know, I got a lot of things to do, and I don't have time to baby bird the salt into the water. So I have to fight myself all the time and just slowly kind of add it to the water, have a pump going, those sorts of things. So mixing procedure, obviously, that has to be recommended via the brand of salt that you are using. And one last thing, and this also can be one of those things that maybe you do it, maybe you don't, based off the recommendations of the manufacturer, and that is temping the water. So if you are mixing salt water and you're going to be doing a large water change in your reef tank, it's not a bad idea to get that water up to temp prior to doing that. Do I do it? No, I do not do it. I don't worry about it too much. I don't do big enough water changes where that really is a issue. But if I was dealing with a nano tank, and even doing something as simple as a 1 or 2 gallon water change, yeah, I'm going to temp that out before I just go ahead and dump a bunch of cold room temperature water into a tank that is that small. All right, question 1. There you got it. There you got it. How do you mix salt water for your aquariums? Coming up next, question 2. What is the salt water ratio for water? All right, question 2. What is the salt to water ratio for saltwater aquariums? It's a really weird way to ask what is the recommended salinity for a reef tank, but people might be asking that question because they don't know about salinity. And they're just like, all right, I got this bucket of salt and I'm trying to mix salt water. What do I do? So the recommended salinity for a saltwater or reef tank for me is going to be 35 parts per thousand. As far as specific gravity goes, because those are two different things, salinity, specific gravity, I go by salinity because it's a nice, big, easy to remember number. 35. That's what I'm going for. As far as specific gravity, you can get into that window that is 1.024 to the word to 1.026. That tends to keep you in that probably 34 to 35 parts per thousand range. It's just a different way of measuring it, and there's videos out there that will explain the difference between specific gravity and salinity. I go for salinity, and that's how I measure it. But as far as the water ratio to salt for your aquarium, the way in which you measure it is incredibly important. And what I'm going to measure my water with is a refractometer. And the reason I prefer the refractometer over the hydrometer is that you can calibrate the refractometer with a solution that usually is designed to be at that 35 parts per thousand mark. There's a few companies out there that put it out, and basically all you do is you take your refractometer, hold it up to your eye, put a couple drops on the screen, drop down the lid, look through it, and it will show you a line. That line, whether it is wherever it is, if you're using a calibration fluid that is designed to be at 35 parts per thousand, when you put those drops on there and you look through it, there's usually a little screw that comes with it. And there's like this little piton on the top, and you take the screwdriver, you put it in there and kind of twist it, and you'll see the line drop. There's usually a light blue and a dark blue line, and that line that goes across, you're trying to get that lined up on 35 parts per thousand. When you do that, that is going to let you know that your tank, I'm sorry, not your tank, your refractometer is calibrated at that point. So some folks, argue the point of using RODI, RODI water to calibrate their refractometer. And I mean, as long as your filters are good and changed up, and I guess that could work. But for me, I'm a gun guy, and I'm not going to shoot at the ground to sight in my gun. I'm going to shoot for the bullseye. That's usually the way that I look at that. But you guys go ahead and argue that in the comment section, for those of you that have been around for a minute. And there's something, if you guys are still here, you guys that have been in the hobby for a while, I got something for you I meant to put at the beginning of this video. But we'll cover that here towards the end. All right, that's question number 2. What's the ratio, salt to water, for your saltwater aquarium? All right, question number 3. What is the best container for mixing salt water? I prefer food grade plastics. That's usually what I use. I have used everything from brute containers to actual water storage containers. I think my preference is probably the brute containers, especially on a small scale, whether it be a 20-gallon or a 40-gallon brute container. They are very clean plastics, and they're easy to move around, especially if you get the little wheel cart that can screw into the bottom of them. I like those quite a bit. I use them here at the store, not necessarily for saltwater, but I use them mostly for fresh. But they make life easy. But that's probably the important thing, is that you're using a very high quality plastic that isn't going to leach things into the water. Because you have, depending on how good your RODI filter is, and you put RODI water into your bin prior to actually adding any salt, it usually is pretty unstable. And there are situations where that water is so unstable that it actually is trying to pull things into itself, and it actually can pull stuff out of the plastic. A lot of people think that the plastic is leaching. It's more that the water, especially have a deionized resin on your RODI filter, that is making the water incredibly imbalanced, and it's trying to balance itself out, such as nature tends to do, and it can actually pull things out of the plastic. So using a high quality plastic is definitely recommended, and food grade is usually good enough, especially for mixing salt water. I like the brute containers. The 20 gallons are great, especially for smaller aquariums. I've used the 47 gallon. Currently, I have 250 gallon water storage tanks, and I'm looking to get 2 more for the shop. Some for store use, the other one for customers to sell the water. So I tend to like the water bins, but they're not cheap, man. They've gone up in price substantially, especially because I opened the store mid to late COVID, and it was kind of crazy. I went back and looked at what I got, and the prices have gone up dramatically for water storage bins. I had to truck a bunch of water over to a customer's house. I bought one of those. What is it? $250. The ones with the cages. It was something like $600. It was brand new, which I wasn't going to buy a used one for somebody else's water. But yeah, the prices on those water storage bins have gone up painfully high. So maybe focus on the brute trash containers. Those might be the way to go. All right, question number 4. How long will mixed salt water last? It's a very good question. And this is going to definitely fall on the doorstep of, it depends on what brand of salt you are using. There are brands of salt water that you mix it and you have to use it within 12 hours, because what is going to start happening is the calcium and alkalinity are going to start going at it, and you're going to start losing some alkalinity, or you might lose some calcium. You can also, if you throw a power head in there or a heater in there for an extended period of time, that also can speed up the process of loss of alkalinity. There are really good brands of salt that last up to 7 days or so. There are brands of salt out there that are really good as well, that you got to use it within half a day of mixing it. So I would definitely do some research. I have, I would say, studied this quite a bit over the last couple of years, and I have found that if you are mixing salt water and kicking around, for an extended period of time, that it may be very important to check the calcium and alkalinity and see what the levels are at. There's nothing wrong with mixing a batch of salt water, and let's say you got one of those big storage bins and you just let it sit there for a extended period of time. The salinity is probably not going to change outside of potentially some evaporation that's going to happen in that bin, but if it's sealed off, probably not going to be a whole lot of instability in there. But what I would do prior to using that water, especially if it's been sitting there for an extended period of time, is test that salinity, test the alkalinity, test the calcium, see where it's at, because you don't want to take that water and go do a water change without testing any of that stuff, and then you're basically stripping calcium and alkalinity out of your reef tank, which is going to have a very big impact on your corals and inverts. If you have stuff sitting around for an extended period of time, test it. Just because it hasn't been in a reef tank yet doesn't mean you can't test it. And that's a good way to figure out, the valuability of your salt and how long, the shelf life of it is to mix them up and just let it sit around. And, you can make a project out of it. Let's say you take your salt, mix up a gallon, day 1, you test it and you test your calcium, alkalinity, salinity, keep a log. Day 2, do it again. Day 3, day 4, day 5, onward. And that's going to let you know exactly how long your salt is going to be valuable in, X amount of days. And at, let's say maybe day 7, the alkalinity starts to drop off. So at that point, if you were to mix salt water and it was going to go past 7 days, you probably want to test that before you go and do your water change. All right. There it is. Top 4 questions. All right, folks, that's going to do it for me. Thanks so much for joining me today. If you want to learn more about mixing salt water, check this video out. I will see you over there.